Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to start chapter 4, the Mughal Empire. Ruling as large a territory as the Indian subcontinent with such a diversity of people and cultures was an extremely difficult task for any ruler to accomplish in the Middle Ages. So India was had a number of diverse people and cultures, so it was very difficult for any ruler to rule over them. Quite in contrast to their predecessors, the Mughals created an empire and accomplished what had hitherto seemed possible for only a short period of time. From the later half of the 16th century, they expanded their kingdom from 16th Agra and Delhi. So, in the 16th century, they expanded their kingdom from Agra and Delhi. Until in the 17th century, they controlled nearly all the subcontinent. So, in the 17th century, they nearly controlled all the Indian subcontinent. They imposed structures of administration and ideas of governance that outlasted their rule, leaving a political legacy that succeeding rulers of the subcontinent could not ignore. Today, the Prime Minister of India addresses the nation of Independence Day from the rampart of the Red Fort in Delhi, the residence of the Mughal Empire. So, the Red Fort you can see, which was built by the Mughal Empire. Who were the Mughals? The Mughals were descendants of the two great lineage of rulers. From the mother side, they were descendants of Genghis Khan, died in 1227, the Mongol rulers who ruled over parts of China and Central Asia. From their father's side, they were the successor of Timur, died in 1404, the ruler of Iran, Iraq and modern-day Turkey. However, the Mughals did not like to be called Mughals or Mongol. This was because Genghis Khan's memory was associated with the massacre of innumerable people. It was also linked with the Uzbeks, their Mongol competitors. On the other hand, the Mughals were proud of their Timurid ancestry, not least of all because their great ancestors had captured Delhi in 1398. They celebrated their genealogy pictorially, each ruler getting a picture made of Timur and himself. Take a look at figure 2, which is somewhat like a group photograph. So you can see in figure 2. So here a miniature painting dated back to 1702 to 1712 of Timur, his descendants and the Mughal emperors. Timur is in the center and on his right is the son Miran Shah, the first Mughal emperor, Babur's great grandfather. So you can see Miran Shah, and then Abu Said, Babur's grandfather. To the left of the Timur are Sultan Muhammad Mirza, Babur's great grandfather, and Umair Sheikh, Babur's father. The Mughal emperors Babur, Akbar, and Shah Jahan are the third, fourth, and fifth individuals on Timur's right and on his left. In the same order are Humayun, Jahangir and Aurangzeb. So you can see that they are sitting with Timur. So this was their legacy of making the picture together. Mughal military campaigns. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, 1526 to 1530, succeeded to the throne of Fergana in 1494 when he was only 12 years old. So when he was 12 years old, he succeeded the throne in 1494. He was forced to leave his ancestral throne due to the invasion of another Mongol group, the Uzbeks. After years of wandering, the siege Kabul in 1504. In 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, at Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra. So in 1526, he defeated the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, in the Battle of Panipat and captured Delhi and Agra. So you can see in figure 3, Mughal army on campaign. So you can see how they campaigned. Table 1 charts some of the major campaigns of the Mughals. Study it carefully and see if you can notice any long-term patterns. You will notice, for example, the Afghans were an immediate threat to Mughal authority. Note the relationship between the Mughals and the Ahoms. See also in chapter 7. The Sikhs also in chapter 8 and 10, and Mewars and Marwars. See also in chapter 9. So in figure 4 you can see cannons were important addition in 16th century warfare. Babur used them effectively in the first battle of Panipat. So gunpowder technology was brought to India for warfare in the 14th century. Firearms were used for the first time in regions such as Gujarat, Malwa and Deccan. and was used by Babur in the early 16th century. So gunpowder was also used by them. How was Humayun relationship with Safavid Iran different from the Akbars? Did the annexation of Golconda and Bijapur in Aurangzeb's reign and hostilities in the Deccan? So the table 1 shows the Mughal emperors, major campaign and event. So Babur ruled from 1526 to 1513. In 1526, he defeated Ibrahim Lodi and his Afghan supporters at Panipat. In 1527, defeated Rana Sanga, Rajput ruler and allies at Khanua. In 1528, defeated the Rajputs at Chanderi, established control over Agra and Delhi before his death. So before his death, he established the control over Agra and Delhi. And Humayun, who ruled between 1530 to 1540 and from 1555 to 1556, Humayun divided his inheritance according to the will of the father. His brothers were each given a province. The ambition of his brother Mirza Kamran weakened Humayun's cause against Afghan competitor. So the ambitions of his brother Mirza weakened the Humayun's cause against Afghan competitors. Sher Khan defeated Humayun at Chausa in 1539 and Kanauj in 1540, forcing him to flee to Iran. In Iran, Humayun received help from the Safavid Shah. He recaptured Delhi in 1555 but died the next year after the accident in this building. So you can see the building here. He died there. Akbar was 13-year-old when he became the emperor. His reign can be divided into 3 periods. So Akbar ruled from 1556 to 1605. So in 1556 to 1570, Akbar became independent of the regent Bairam Khan and other members of his domestic staff. Military campaigns were launched against the Suris and other Afghans against the neighboring kingdoms of the Malwa and Gondwana. And to suppress the revolt of his half-brother Mirza Hakim and the Uzbeks, in 1568, the Sisodia capital of Chittor was seized, and in 1569, Ranthambore. In 1570 to 1585, military campaigns in Gujarat were followed by campaigns in the east in Bihar, Bengal and Orissa. These campaigns were complicated by 1579 to 1580, a revolt in support of Mirza Hakim. So in 1585 to 1605, expansion of Akbar's empire. So the expansion was done in this period. Campaigns were launched in the northeast. Kandahar was seized from the Safavids. Kashmir was annexed, as also Kabul. After death of Mirza Hakim, campaigns in the Deccan started, and Berar, Khandesh and parts of Ahmednagar was annexed. In the last years of his reign, Akbar was distracted by the rebellion of Prince Salim, the future emperor Jahangir. So he was distracted by the rebellion of Jahangir. So Jahangir ruled from 1605 to 1627. Military campaigns started by Akbar continued. The Sisodia rulers of Mewar, Amar Singh accepted Mughal service. Less successful campaigns against the Sikh, the Ahoms and the Ahmednagar followed. Prince Khurram, the future emperor Shah Jahan, rebelled in the last years of his reign. The efforts of Noor Jahan, Jahangir's wife, to marginalize him were unsuccessful. So Shah Jahan ruled from 1627 to 1658. Mughal campaigns continued in the Deccan under Shah Jahan. The Afghan noble Khan Jahan Lodi rebelled and was defeated. Campaign was launched against Ahmednagar. The Bundelas were defeated and the Orcha seized. In the northwest, the campaigns to seize Balkha from the Uzbeks was unsuccessful, and Kandahar was lost to the Safavids. In 1632, Ahmednagar was finally annexed and the Bijapur forces sued for peace. In 1657 to 1658, there was conflict over succession among Shah Jahan's son. Aurangzeb was victorious and his 3 brothers, included Dara Shah, were killed. Shah Jahan was imprisoned for the rest of his life in Agra. So Shah Jahan was imprisoned by his son Aurangzeb. So Aurangzeb ruled from 1658 to 1707. So in the northeast, the Ahoms were defeated in 1663. They rebelled again in 1680. Campaigns in the northwest against the Yusufzai and the Sikhs were temporarily successful. Mughal intervention in the succession and internal politics of the Rathore Rajputs of Mewar led to the rebellion. Campaigns against the Maratha chief Shivaji were initially successful, but Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji, who escaped from Agra, declared himself as an independent king, and resumed his campaign against the Mughals. Prince Akbar rebelled against Aurangzeb and received support from the Marathas and the Deccan Sultanate. He finally fled to Safavid Iran. After Akbar's rebellion, Aurangzeb sent armies against the Deccan Sultanate. Bijapur were annexed in 1685 and Golconda in 1687. And from 1698, Aurangzeb personally managed campaign in the Deccan against the Marathas, who started guerrilla warfare. So guerrilla warfare, so they hide and they attack. Aurangzeb also had to face the rebellion in North India of the Sikhs, Jats and Satnamis, in the northeast of the Ahoms, and in the Deccan of the Marathas. His death followed by a succession conflict amongst his sons. So after his death, there was conflict in the succession among his sons. So you can see military campaign under Aurangzeb and Akbar. So you can see the military campaign from Kabul, Kandahar to the south in Golconda, Bijapur. You can see that almost all over the India was almost 80% of India. 80% of India was in their control. Mughal traditions of succession. The Mughal did not believe in the rule of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited his father's estate. Instead, they followed the Mughal and Timurid custom of coparcenary inheritance or division of the inheritance amongst all the sons. Following the highlighted passage in table 1 and note the evidence for rebellions by Mughal princes which you think is a fairer division of inheritance. Primogeniture or coparcenary. So Mughal marriage with the Rajputs. The mother of Jahangir was a Kachwaha princess, daughter of a Rajput ruler of Amber, modern day Rajput. The mother of Shah Jahan was a Rathore princess, daughter of the Rajput ruler of Marwar, Jodhpur. Mughal relation with other ruler. Take a look at table 1 once again. You will notice that the Mughal rulers campaigned constantly against rulers who refused to accept their authority. But as the Mughals became powerful, many other rulers also joined them. So they were very powerful, and some other rulers also joined them. The Rajputs are a good example of this. Many of them married their daughters into Mughal families and received high positions, but many resisted as well. The Sisodia Rajput of Mewar refused to accept Mughal authority for a long time. Once defeated, however, they were honorably treated by the Mughals, given their lands, Watan, back as an assignment, Watan Jagir. The carefully balance between defeating but not humiliating their opponents enabled the Mughals to extend their influence over many kings and chieftains. But it was difficult to keep the balance all the time. Look at the table 1 again. Note that Aurangzeb insulted Shivaji when he was to accept Mughal authority. What was the consequence of this insult? Mansabdars and Jagirdars. As the empire expanded to encompass different regions, the Mughals recruited diverse bodies of people. From a small nucleus of Turkish nobles to Turanis, they expanded to include Iranians, Indian Muslims, Afghans, Rajput, Marathas and other groups. Those who joined Mughal services were enrolled as Mansabdars. The term Mansabdar referred to an individual who held a Mansab, meaning a position or rank. It was a grading system used by the Mughals to fix one rank, second salary and third military responsibilities. Rank and salary were determined by a numerical value called Jat. The higher the Jat, the more prestigious was the noble position in court and the larger his salary. So Jat ranking, the nobles with a Jat of 5,000 were ranked higher than those of 1,000. In Akbar reign, there were 29 Mansabdar with a rank of 5,000 Jat. By Aurangzeb's reign, the number of Mansabdar had increased to 79. Would this have meant more expenditure for the state? The Mansabdar military responsibilities required him to maintain a specified number of Savar or cavalrymen. The Mansabdar brought his cavalrymen for review, got them registered, their horses branded, and then received money to pay them as salary. Mansabdar received their salaries as revenue assignments called Jagirs, which were somewhat like Iktas. But unlike Muktis, Most Mansabdar did not actually reside in or administer their jagirs. They only had right to the revenue of the assignments which was collected for them by their service, while the Mansabdars themselves served in some part of the country. In Akbar's reign, these jagirs were carefully assessed so that their revenue were roughly equal to the salary of the Mansabdar. By Aurangzeb's reign, this was no longer the case, and the actual revenue collected was often less than the granted sum. There was also a huge increase in the number of Mansabdars, which meant a long wait before they receive a Jagir. These and other factors created a shortage in the number of Jagirs. As a result, many Jagirdars tried to extract as much as revenue as possible while they had a Jagir. Aurangzeb was unable to control these developments in the last years of his reign, and the peasantry therefore suffered tremendously. So you can see the figure of a Mansabdar in the march with his Savars. In figure 5, in figures you can 6 you can see details from a miniature for Shah Jahan reign depicting corruption in his father administration. First, a corrupt officer receiving a bribe and a tax collector punishing poor peasants. So you can see a tax collector is punishing the poor, and he is a corrupt officer receiving a bribe. So these were the scene in their rule. So it was very bad. It influenced the whole country. Zabt and Zamindars. The main source of income available to Mughal rulers was tax on the produce of the peasantry. In most places, peasants paid taxes through the rural elites, that is the headman of the or the local chieftain. The Mughals used one term Jamindars to describe all immediaries, whether they were local headmen of villages or powerful chieftains. So they were called Jamindars. Akbar's revenue minister Todar Mal carried out a careful survey of crop yield, prices and area cultivated for a 10-year period 1570 to 1510. On the basis of this data, tax was fixed on each crop in cash. Each province was divided into revenue circles with its own schedule of revenue rates for individual crops. This revenue system was known as Zabt. It was prevalent in those areas where Mughal administration could survey the land and keep the very careful accounts. This was not possible in provinces such as Gujarat and Bengal. In some areas, the Zamindar exercised a great deal of power. The exploitation by Mughal administrator could drive them to rebellion. Sometimes Zamindars and peasants of the same caste allied in rebelling against Mughal authority. These peasants' revolt challenged the stability of the Mughal Empire from the end of the 17th century. So the peasants were suffering because of these rulers taking excess amount and exploitation by the Mughal administrators. Akbarnama and Akbari. Akbar ordered one of his close friends and courtiers, Abul Fazl, to write a history of his reign. Abul Fazl wrote a 3-volume history of Akbar's reign titled Akbarnama. So there he had his own book in 3 volumes. The first book dealt with Akbar's ancestors, and the second volume recorded the event of Akbar's reign. The third volume is the Aini Akbari. It deals with Akbar's administration, household, army, the revenue, and the geography of his empire. It also provides rich detail about the tradition and culture of the people living in India. The most interesting aspect about the Aini Akbari is its diverse statistical detail about things as diverse as crop yield, prices, wage, and revenues. So you can see Akbar receiving the Akbarnama in Abul Fazl from Abul Fazl. So Abul Fazl is giving the Akbarnama to Akbar. So a closer look, Akbar policies. The broad feature of administration were laid down by Akbar and were elaborately discussed by Abul Fazl in his book. The Akbarnama in particular in the last volume in Aini Akbari. Abul Fazl explained that the empire was divided into provinces called Subas, governed by a Subadar who carried out both political and military functions. Each province also had a financial officer or diwan. For the maintenance of peace and order in his province, the Subadar was supported by other officers such as the military paymaster Bakshi, the minister in charge of religion and charitable patronage Sadr, and the military commander Fauzdar, and the town police commander Kotwal. So Noor Jahan influence in Jahangir's court. So Mehrunisa married the Emperor Jahangir in 1611 and received the title Noor Jahan. She remained extremely loyal and supportive to the monarch. As a mark of honor, Jahangir struck silver coins bearing his own title on one side, and on the other side inscriptions struck the name of Queen Begum Noor Jahan. The adjoining document is an order Farman of Noor Jahan. The square seal state command of her most sublime and elevated majesty Noor Jahan Padshah Begum. The round seal states by the son of Shah Jahangir. She said she became as brilliant as the moon. May Noor Jahan Padshah be the lady of the age. So this was the Farman. You can see in the figure. So Akbar Noble commanded large armies and had access to large amount of revenue. While they were loyal to empire, functioned efficiently, but by the end of the 17th century, many nobles had built independent networks of their own. Their loyalties to the empire was weakened by their own self-interest. So, because of their self-interest, the loyalties with the empire was weakened. So while Akbar was at Fatehpur Sikri during the 1570s, he started discussion on religion with the ulama, brahmanas, Jesuits, priests who were Roman Catholics and Zoroastrians. These discussions took place in the Ibadat Khana. He was interested in the religion and social custom of different people. Akbar's interaction with people of different faith made him realize that religious scholars who emphasized ritual and dogma were often bigots. So dogma is a statement of or an interpretation declared as authoritative with the expectation that it would be followed without question. So it was dogma, and bigot was an individual who is intolerant of another person's religious belief or culture. So their teachings created divisions and disharmony amongst his subjects. This eventually led Akbar to the idea of Sulhi Kul or universal peace. This idea of tolerance did not discriminate between people of different religions in his realm. Instead, it focused on a system of ethics, honesty, justice, peace that was universally applicable. Abul Fazl helped Akbar in framing a vision of governance around this idea of Sulh-e-Kul. The principle of governance was followed by Jahangir and Shah Jahan as well. So you can see in the figure Akbar holding discussion with learned individual of different faith in the Ibadat Khana. So you can see in Ibadat Khana different religious people were gathered together with Akbar. So Akbar commissioned the translation of many Sanskrit words into Persian. A Maktab Khana or translation bureau was also established at Fatehpur Sikri for this purpose. The Mahabharata, Ramayana, Lilavati and Yoga Vashishta were some of the notable Sanskrit works that were taken up for translation. The Razvanama, Persian translation of the Mahabharata, contained the lavish illustration of the events of Mahabharata. So Sulhi Kul Jahangir, Akbar's son, described his father's policy of Sulhi Kul in the following words: as in the wide expanse of the divine compassion, there is a room for all classes and the followers of all creeds. So in his imperial dominations, which on all sides were limited only by the sea, there was room for the professors of opposite religions and for belief good and bad, and the road to intolerance was closed. Sunnis and Shias met in one mosque, and the Christians and Jews in one church to pray. He consistently followed the principle of universal peace, Sulh-e-Kul. So the Mughal Empire in the 17th century and after, the administrative and military efficiency of the Mughal empire led to great economic and commercial prosperity. International travelers described it as the fable land of wealth. But these some visitors were also appalled at the state of poverty that existed side by side with the greatest opulence. The inequalities were glaring. Documents from the 12th year of Shah Jahan reign informed us that the highest ranking Mansabdar were only 445 in number out of the total of 8,000. The small number, a mere 5.6% of the total numbers of Mansabdar, received 61.5% of the total estimated revenue of the empire as salaries for themselves and their troopers. The Mughal emperors and their Mansabdar spent a great deal of their income on salaries and goods. This expenditure benefited the artisans and peasantries who supplied them with goods and produce, but the scale of revenue collection left very little for investment in the hands of the primary producers, the peasants and the artisans. The poor among them lived from hand to mouth, and they could hardly consider investing in additional resources, tools and supplies. To increase productivity, the wealthier peasantry and artisan groups, the merchants and the banker profited in this economic world. The enormous wealth and resources commanded by the Mughal elite made them an extremely powerful group of people in the late 17th century. As the authority of the Mughal emperor slowly declined, his servants emerged as powerful centers of power in the region. They constituted new dynasties and held command of provinces like Hyderabad and Awadh. Although they continued to recognize the Mughal emperor in Delhi as the master, by the 18th century the provinces of the empire had consolidated their independent political identities. We will read more about them in chapter 10. Kings and Queens. There were several great monarchs, all near contemporaries in different parts of the world in the 16th century. These included the ruler of Ottoman Turkey, Sultan Suleiman, 1520 to 1566. During his rule, the Ottoman state expanded into Europe, seizing Hungary and besieging Austria. His armies also seized Baghdad and Iraq, much of North Africa, all the way into Morocco. Acknowledged Ottoman authority. Suleiman also reconstructed the Ottoman navy. Its domination over the eastern Mediterranean brought the navy into competition with Spain. In the Arabian Sea, it challenged the Portuguese. The monarch was given the title of Al-Kunani, the lawgiver. Because of the large number of regulations Kunan passed during his region, these were aimed to standardize administrative producers throughout the expanding dominations of the empire, and specifically to protect the peasantry from forced labor and extraordinary taxes. Later in the 17th century, when public order declined in the Ottoman domains, the reign of Suleiman Kunani was remembered as a period of ideal governance. So here the chapter is finished.